Jordan Love and Garrett Wilson are two of the biggest losers coming out of the first few days of free agency. We tell you why and discuss four other biggest losers on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Fantasy Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcasting network. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is giving you a way to turn that energy into even bigger potential wins with a college basketball parlay profit boost. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. All right, today we are going through the biggest losers over the first few days of free agency. So we'll each give you our three biggest losers. We already did this the opposite way with the biggest winners on our last show. So if you missed that, you can go listen to it after this episode. Vinny, through the first 3 days, who would you say is the biggest loser so far in free agency?
No, I had high hopes for the Jets doing something good. They did not. They did not get Malik Willis. Wow. They haven't gotten Kirk Cousins, and they're not going to get Kirk Cousins because they traded for Geno Smith. And it was crazy because the Raiders, as soon as Geno said he wanted out, they were like, okay, we're going to release you. And then Geno said, I'll take Miami if they're there. Then Malik Willis signed with the Dolphins, and the Browns weren't all that interested. So they end up trading him to the Jets, where Geno Smith started his career. So it's coming full circle. I don't know what Aaron Glenn is doing here. I really don't. I really don't know what the Jets are doing overall with their entire offseason. They've slapped together a bunch of defensive signings. I cannot tell you how that defense is going to come together. Offensively, however, I'm much more concerned because that's what we want in fantasy football. Breece Hall, okay, franchise tag, we thought that was a bit questionable when they needed to spend elsewhere. They still spent elsewhere, so I guess that didn't do anything there. But now they go get Geno Smith, and you can't feel great about Geno Smith for Garrett Wilson. I don't think there's all that much left in there with Geno Smith. He's 35. It's not like he's an upside quarterback of any kind at this point. Mm-hmm. I don't know if even Gardner Minshew would have been better. I don't know. I can't even tell you that at this point. But what I know is that this is not good for Garrett Wilson. And then all the money they're throwing around, where's any help at wide receiver? I mean, there's nothing really that you're getting as a number two. Now, they could wait in the draft where they have got some multiple assets here to go after those things. But in terms of right now, free agency, Garrett Wilson coming back from injury, they said goodbye to John Mechie, which was very interesting as well. He had a few flashes there. Now he goes on to the Panthers. So I'm not quite sure what is going on with the Jets. And again, they're a mess. And Breece Hall coming back in some ways hurts because, again, they're going to stay run heavy probably in this type of team with now Aaron Glenn and now this different offensive philosophy with Frank Reich. And that means Hall's another guy who can cut into his targets. And then also not feeling like they're going to want to throw the ball downfield as much here with Geno Smith coming back. So Garrett Wilson, look, good for him that he hasn't wanted out of there. He got paid, I guess, and that's why you play for them. But it's not the greatest fantasy thing for Garrett Wilson developing, and it may never be while he stays with the Jets.
I will say, I think Geno Smith throwing him the ball is probably better than Justin Fields throwing him the ball. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what this offense is going to look like. And also these moves that they're making as a team, it looks like a team being okay, we got to spend some money, I guess. But really, we are just tanking hard because they're spending money on one of the oldest middle linebackers in the league, in Demario Davis. They're spending money on Minkah Fitzpatrick, who's clearly they traded for him. It clearly passed his time. David Onyemata, a defensive tackle that's older as well. Like we said, bringing in Geno Smith, spending money on franchising tag of running back and Breece Hall. I don't really get the moves they're making at all. So yeah, this is not going to be a pretty team. in terms of Garrett Wilson, the reason I didn't have him as a biggest loser on my list is because I don't know if it got worse for him than last year. I don't know if that's possible, but it certainly hasn't gotten like any better unless Geno Smith becomes his self in 2022 Seahawks form and carries this team somehow. But yeah, it's not great. My biggest loser is going to be Jordan Love. And honestly, I was shocked by how low his fantasy production has been the last 2 years. Like, I know it's been inconsistent and up and down. First year as a starter, really solid, nearly 19 points per game. He was a top 8 fantasy quarterback. Great, right? Last 2 years, though, quarterback 21 and average scoring in 2025 at just 15.7 points per game. And in 2024, he had just 15.6 points per game. So the last 2 years, I think that's more of the fantasy quarterback that we can expect from him outside of that first season. And this offseason has not been nice to him so far. They lost Elton Jenkins, their starting guard / center, but the center, especially where he played this last year, now they're going to have to go to Sean Rainon, who they re-signed, but he had a 42 PFF pass block grade last year. That's Sean Rainon. That was one of the worst among all centers. He had a terrible season, right? Well, Jenkins has been a very, very reliable pass blocker throughout his career. So losing him is going to be massive. They're most likely going to lose their left tackle. They're starting left tackle over the last 4 seasons. And Rasheed Walker, he's a free agent. And no one has signed him yet, but he was the top tackle on the board. Last offseason, they already made the mistake paying up for Aaron Banks at left guard. He was terrible for the 49ers. They were so excited to get him, and then he stunk the first year for the Packers, like, duh. Their right guard, Anthony Belton, was terrible last year as a rookie. So they have one good offensive lineman now at this point after free agency, and it's Zach Top. I do love him at right tackle. But then they also lose Romeo Doubs and didn't add anyone else, right? And you can say, well, maybe Matthew Golden will have a bigger year in a second year, but we have to wait and see. I mean, he was very unproductive as a rookie. And Romeo Doubs was by far the most targeted guy by Jordan Love over these last 2 seasons. He also had the most touchdowns among wide receivers for the Packers over the last 2 seasons from Jordan Love. That just puts a ton of hope onto Tucker Kraft coming back strong this year after tearing his ACL in November. And it wasn't just an ACL. He also had damage to his meniscus and LCL. So this was a serious knee injury. And this is who they're relying on now, unless they spend a first-round pick on another wide receiver. But so far, Jordan Love has to be a big loser in terms of his offensive line and weapons that they've lost / added so far in free agency.
Yeah, I don't know what they're doing here. I think on paper, if you said, hey, Christian Watson, Matthew Golden, and Tucker Kraft could be a good trio here for this team. But again, you brought up the Kraft injury, which is major, and it's going to take time for him to maybe even be the same athletic force he was last year, dominating. Then Golden, he didn't show us anything to say that he's going to have a breakout second year. Usually you get some taste of that, right? I mean,
we didn't even like him in college either. So
yeah, we got a very small taste. We didn't see a touchdown until the playoffs. So I don't know. They must have really high hopes for Golden in year 2, and maybe high hopes that Christian Watson somehow will stay healthy for this team. But yeah, I mean, Jordan Love, it's disappointing because right away he was a very good fantasy asset at quarterback, but now he's a guy that you're only looking at 2 QB in Superflex leagues and playing every week and hoping for the best. And even so, you also had the durability issues where this is why Malik Willis got paid, because he gave him enough time to play in the past couple of years where people saw him and paid him. So again, that's not good for also his injuries as well, to have some changes on the offensive line. So very interesting there what the Packers doing. Very interesting as in not very good here for Jordan Love. Now, we do have 4 more players we need to bring up here that's been so far, they're kind of losers in free agency for what their team is doing and not necessarily what has gone on with them. We'll get into that here after we hear from one of our sponsors. All right, it's time for March, and we know what happens in March. After the free agency and the frenzy that comes with that, there's madness in college basketball. It's nonstop, big games, tight spreads, momentum swings every single night, from easy early tip-offs to late-night West Coast shootouts where we're watching the action all the way late on the board. FanDuel is there for you. FanDuel is giving you a way to turn that energy into even bigger potential wins with a college basketball parlay profit boost. You can mix spreads, totals, and player props to match how you see these games playing out in these conference tournaments and getting into the big dance. Then you can apply your profit boost and instantly bump up the potential payout. There's all kinds of good odds, so check them out for these games. With so many games going on, you'll find a game that you want to get in on the action for. Go safe, go bold, ride with the team you've been following all season. It's your parlay, your style. Now with more upside behind it. Look, if the Miami, Ohio Redhawks can lose a game, that means anything can happen. It can get wild here. It's just the beginning of all that action. Get in now on FanDuel. Again, FanDuel is where you want to get in on college basketball. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel, play your game. All right, we will continue looking at 4 more losers from free agency. We've talked about 2 notable guys so far, Jordan Love and Garrett Wilson. They can't love what the Packers and Jets have done so far. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. We're talking about free agency, all that good stuff here. So you can get in on the Everyday Club right now. This is no interruptions, no commercials there. Members only Discord access and so much more, all for just $5 a month or $50 a year. So we can help you dominate your fantasy leagues through there as we get past free agency, get into the draft. There's a lot of analysis that you need to have here in Locked On Fantasy Football. Go to LockedOnFantasyFootball.supercast.com or check the link in the show notes to learn more and join the Everyday Club and support our show a little bit more each day. All right, Michelle, it is time to reveal our next loser, and I think you're going to stay in the backfield with your next one. Where are you going there for loser number 2 in free agency?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Bucky Irving. Right. I mean, before free agency started, he was running back 14 in cost. That's where he is right now for consensus rankings. And free agency, maybe that will change as we go throughout the summer. But he was just the running back 18 in 2025, running back 19 in 2024. And you could have been excited that he was losing Rachaad White and that Sean Tucker was a restricted free agent. Maybe he could leave. Well, they tendered Sean Tucker, so he's here for at least 2026. And then, they move on from Rachaad White and didn't sign him. But then they signed Kenneth Gainwell, who is basically the same guy, but I think overall better in both a pass catcher and a running back. So I think they actually upgraded that. And last year, there was a lot of injuries, so maybe Bucky Irving can come back and get a big share of the workload, which he will. Like, he'll have a big share. But the biggest concern is that if Kenneth Gainwell is going to take a lot of these receptions again away from Bucky Irving, just like Rachaad White did, and then Sean Tucker is still there, who was the goal line back last year, especially towards the end of the year, that just is not a good scenario for him in terms of being a top 15 running back, which is what he's costing. Did Bucky Irving didn't have a single carry near the goal line last year? Like 5 yards out, 5 yards to the goal line, not a single carry did he get. Sean Tucker led the team with 11. Rachaad White had 8. So maybe he takes over those Rachaad White carries near the goal line and he splits it with Tucker. Maybe Gainwell gets some, or maybe the new OC completely changes it up. But lots of things to be worried about there in terms of targets and goal line opportunities. And then the loss of Mike Evans. I mean, that impacted the offense so much last year. And now he's officially gone. And it's not like they've done anything to replace him. So they're going to need a Emeka Egbuka to step up big time and all these other younger players, or maybe add someone else. But like without Mike Evans, that takes away a big part of the offense that defenses are scared of, which is going to make it harder to run. So I think overall, it could be better for Irving next year with the change of OC and White gone, but I don't really see it. I don't see a way that it's going to be that much better.
Yeah, I mean, this is all on Josh Grizzard. It wasn't totally there. I mean, he had not as much he needed to work with last year, moving on from Liam Cohen. Now they move on again to Zach Robinson, who was with the Falcons last year. We talked about Bijan Robinson building on what he did last year because he has no Tyler Algier. They did manage that backfield pretty well, where Robinson could still score a lot. You didn't see him get hurt, and he was still very effective with Algier there. So it's interesting now they have 3 backs. Sean Tucker was tendered as you mentioned, with now Kenneth Gainwell in the mix. So, yeah, I'm a little bit worried. There's too many situational carries that can go away. Tucker had his moments flashing in the red zone last year. Rashad White was actually pretty decent last year, and so is Kenneth Gainwell. So I think essentially you're trading out White for Gainwell, so that doesn't change for Irving, and you still have Tucker in the mix. So this is a little bit disappointing, again, for Bucky Irving. Maybe they just don't see him as a back that can see all those carries. Maybe he needs Liam Cohen to kind of recognize that here to give him that type of workload. But it's just not the best news when you add that kind of depth and keep that kind of depth here in ways go lateral from White to Gainwell. Now, I've got another guy that I'm not going to be very high on and want to draft this year. Kenneth Gainwell's former teammate, Jaylen Warren. Now, I do not like the Rico Dowdle signing for Jaylen Warren because Rico Dowdle knows Mike McCarthy's offense. He's a guy that kind of built his value, right, as the backup for the Cowboys. Then when he got his opportunity, he looked pretty good for Dallas, and then he didn't get re-signed. So there's a little bit of disrespect, but then a little bit of kind of second chance to prove himself in this opportunity. And Dowdle, again, can have some big rushing games. And he's also a guy that can finish well in the red zone. So we've seen both those things. Jaylen Warren, I don't think he can dominate the pass catching snaps because Dowdle's not terrible in that aspect either. So I think Dowdle is going to be a real threat to Warren's significant touches here. And look, it's not just you replace Gainwell and what those touches were, but maybe Dowdle gives him a little bit more power to put in there versus Gainwell and Warren, a little bit similar in skill sets. I think Gainwell was still the better power runner, but now you have a clear separation where Dowdle is that guy you're going to pound a little bit more between the tackles, maybe going back to the committee they had with Najee Harris, right? So that's what you're kind of pointing towards here with the Steelers backfield. So I can't be thrilled about Jaylen Warren. I know he was more of a RB2 flex play anyway, but it looked for a moment that he could be seeing a bigger role without Gainwell. But now that's gone here with Dowdle going, because I think Dowdle's still underrated, and it'll be interesting to see who cuts into the workload more, Dowdle on his new team or Gainwell on his new team.
Yeah, I mean, I think they both will, right? And Rico Dowdle is going to take a lot more of the rushing away from Jaylen Warren. Now, maybe Warren can take back his receiving, workload that Kenneth Gainwell took so much of from him this past year, right? Like Warren can catch the ball. He's a better pass catcher than Rico Dowdle, so maybe he gets that. I will also say if you were a Caleb Johnson truther, then you're really, he is really a loser from this free agency. He's clearly not going to be given a shot in his second season now that he's going to be behind Jaylen Warren and Rico Dowdle. Now we have two more biggest losers. We will get to that to close out today's show right after a quick break. It's tax time, but for a lot of us, the old way of doing taxes is a lot. Trying to book an appointment, that's not the most convenient. Sitting in a waiting room with a stack of papers, emailing back and forth and wondering if they really get your situation. But this year, you're getting a major upgrade. Intuit TurboTax now has in-person locations nationwide. You can meet face-to-face with a real tax expert, and your documents get uploaded straight to your TurboTax app on the spot. And just like that, you're done. Your TurboTax expert works to get you every dollar you deserve while you get real-time notifications as you go about your day. It's the relief of walking in and meeting a real person and walking out knowing your taxes are being handled correctly. Head to turbotax.com/local to find a store near you and book your appointment today. All right, let's get into our final losers over the first 3 days of free agency. Vinny, who is your final biggest loser for today?
Yeah, so I hate to say this, but it's another person that we were hoping to have some high hopes for. It is Drake London of the Falcons. Now, I am not enthused by this Tua Tagovailoa thing at all. Like, I don't get it. I wish they had. I was waiting for Joe Flacco. I would take Kirk Cousins back at this point. I don't want to see this happen. So we talked about how Bijan Robinson will benefit because Tua stinks and he's going to have to check it down. And he's going to be under pressure and he's going to duck for cover most of the time so he doesn't get hit or hurt. So he's going to be dumping the ball off to Bijan Robinson and Kyle Pitts. Guess what he's not going to do? He's not going to hang in there and throw the ball downfield the way we want to Drake London. And you had Michael Penix last year. There was some Penix-London chemistry, but that could be off too because of Penix being hurt. Now, if Tua has to start, these guys are starting from scratch. And Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle, where did they do most of their damage? It was getting some short passes in open field and taking off. Now, there were some deep balls that worked, right? But Tua's not that same guy. He's gun shy. He's had all those concussion issues. He's going to be all about getting the ball out quickly or being run heavy with this team, with Stefanski and Reese, Kevin, and Tommy coming over from Cleveland. So that's what they're going to do, really make Bijan Robinson the focus. Now, Tua's going to be more the facilitator and all that. And I don't know what these other receivers are also going to do. We talked about Darnell Mooney being gone. He was either effective at times when he needed to be as a number 2, but now you got Jahan Dotson. He's been a wild card ever since he was drafted by the Commanders, went to the Eagles, didn't do a bunch there as the number 3 receiver by default. Then Ome Zaccheaus in the slot. I mean, what is going on here? Like, that's the other thing you can't forget. Zaccheaus was a busy slot in Atlanta when he was there, and he kind of had that same role in Chicago last year. So that's a short pass guy as well. And Dotson, he's not the same, I don't think, big play guy to put on the outside to help London. So I think it's going to be a lot of Pitts and Robinson. They're going to benefit a lot from this move with Tua and the offense, but Drake London, the offense already was tough for him, and now he's got to deal with a quarterback who's worried most about getting the ball out of his hands and not pushing the ball deep.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It is, because especially with this play style of Drake London, right? He's not the best separator in the world, but he's a great contested catch type guy. Tua, I don't think of him as this guy that's going to throw it up and be like, you make your play, right? Like, I'm going to trust you to make the play. He's very much a rhythm guy where he wants to see guys get open quickly. That was Mike McDaniel's offense where guys got open for him. He had Waddle and Tyreek Hill who knew how to get open and knew what to do with the space. Drake London's just a different type of guy, and he's going to have to trust him and throw this ball up to him and trust him to come down in these tight spots. And I just don't know if Tua will give him those shots. So I agree. I think he's going to be too pricey and too risky. And so far it's looking like not a great situation for him. Now, my last biggest loser will be Drake Maye. The 2 biggest things we said going into free agency that they need to upgrade was offensive line and wide receiver. Now, they have added a piece to both: Elijah Vera Tucker on the offensive line, Romeo Doubs at wide receiver. But even though I said Romeo Doubs leaving Jordan Love was an issue for Jordan Love, it's not enough to fix the Patriots wide receiver room, right? They let Stephon Diggs go. So this is basically just replacing Stephon Diggs. So I think it's pretty much a lateral move at best. They still, I really wanted them to be the team that paid up for Alec Pierce to get Drake Maye, that elite deep threat, because he's such a good deep ball passer. But elite deep threat is definitely not Romeo Doubs. So I'm underwhelmed by that move. And then with Elijah Vera Tucker, it's like, okay, you desperately need to upgrade your offensive line, but now you're bringing in a guy that missed the entire 2025 season with torn triceps, which was the second time he tore his triceps in his NFL career. He has missed a ton of games. He tore his Achilles in 2023. So he played just 7 games in 2022 because he tore his triceps, just 5 games in 2023 because he tore his Achilles. He did play 15 games in 2024 and then 0 games in 2025. So if you're getting a healthy Vera Tucker, then sure, it'll be an upgrade, but this is a huge risk to say this will upgrade our line to what we need for Drake Maye, Elijah Vera Tucker. So I don't love that. We are already worried about Drake Maye going as quarterback 2 because, yeah, he finished there this year, but it was a down year for quarterbacks. Would have been actually the quarterback 7 in 2024 with the same points per game. We talked about how easy his schedule was to start the year, and then we saw that production be way less consistent the second half of the season against harder matchups, and especially in the playoffs. So with the harder schedule, them not really doing much to upgrade the 2 biggest areas of needs to help Drake Maye take that next further step and continue to grow. They still have the draft. They can add pieces, but I'm just very underwhelmed by their free agency signing so far.
Yeah, they knocked it out of the park last year. Obviously, they spent very aggressively, and they got them all the way to the Super Bowl. So you figured the second year they wouldn't do as much. I think right now the biggest place where they kind of made sure they rebounded was on defense, losing Jalen Hawkins, but getting Kevin Byard. But offensively, yeah, underwhelming. Romeo Doubs, they paid him a lot of money, whether you're looking at 3 for 70 or 4 for 80, however you look at it with his contract. It is still a lot of money to give a receiver who's been more of a complimentary guy. I know he was key to the Packers, but I don't know if they're going to just give him that number one treatment here. And you're right, they are taking some chances on their offensive line. There's nothing for certain there with Vera Tucker, with all the issues they had on the left side. And we'll see how Will Campbell kind of rebounds, getting a little bit healthy at left tackle. But overall, again, I didn't think it was going to be the greatest here for Drake Maye. I think there was more indication that his numbers and production will go down, and he's not worth that high cost here in the draft. So it's kind of expected, but still notable to mention here to say, hey, Drake London, if you're thinking about, or Drake Maye, I should say, well, either one of these guys, if you're looking to draft too high, I mean, they were very high, right? I mean, London was also a pretty high score, but just be a little bit wary. It's not their fault, again, because teams go in a different direction. Teams think about ways to improve their team, and sometimes it doesn't always have the certain offensive skill players' best interest in mind. So I just, again, Drake Maye, I'm a little concerned. And there's also that Super Bowl hangover thing that you have to worry about. So creating some changes in the personnel, bringing in Dubs, saying goodbye to Stephon Diggs. Then there's a shakeup at tight end with Austin Hooper gone. There's a lot of things that they're going to have to navigate through here, a little bit of a transition here, bumping us out of the Josh McDaniels, Drake Maye breakout in year 2.
Yeah, absolutely. So this just continues to kind of push him down our rankings, which is going to probably be different than consensus for 2026 with Drake Maye. But that will be it for today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football. Make sure you subscribe and follow us so you get all the latest episodes. We will be back tomorrow on Friday morning. If you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Get Locked On Fantasy Football ad-free, plus members-only Discord access and more, all for just $5 a month. Head to lockedonfantasyfootball.supercast.com to join the club. Have a great night, everybody. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye, y'all.